Welcome to this week's message from Anthem Church. We're so glad you're joining us online today. Our prayer is that this message encourages you, strengthens your faith, and helps you take your next step in following Jesus.
They say maturity is not growing out of your dreams from when you were younger, but growing into them. Not growing out of your dreams, but growing into them. I wonder what you dreamed of when you were this high. Judy, in your 90s, what did you dream of when you were this high? That's a rhetorical question. You don't need to answer. It's hard to remember. Already did it. Ron and Fee, when you were this high, what did you dream of? Did you grow out of them or did you grow into them? See, something of who we are as young people is that we're designed beautifully by God with incredible purpose, and we start to see that starting to come out when we are this high. We start to have a little bit of attitude, and that attitude is pointed in a direction. We start to love to do some things, and we may have parents who don't necessarily know quite what our gifting is or what our unique design is, and what they start to do is they can start to shape us in a particular direction. We know the education system can start to point us in a direction. We know community starts to point us in a direction, and suddenly we grow up in our 20s and our 30s, and we're not quite fulfilling the dreams that we had when we were little, and we get into our mid-40s, and we have a midlife crisis. And we got to find that little boy or little girl again, and we need to find something of the unique design of God. This was my recollection of when I was this high. My most common recollection is, Richard, you're late to the dining room table. It's the middle of winter, you don't have a shirt on. You've got dirty feet and dirty hands. Where have you been? That wasn't an unloving question from my parents, because you all know them and you love them and they're part of this community. But I remember that when I was this high, I used to be that adventurous guy. I know a couple of weeks ago I preached that I was Batman, but I knew that was going to be short-lived. Actually, I was an adventurer at heart. I was the guy that would just always be outdoors. I was the guy that would always be in the dirt, making something, building something, trying to catch something. I would be the guy making the tree house up in the tree. I would be that guy. And then as time goes on, you can start to live into it a little bit, those of us that are lucky. And I had the privilege of leading another church, and we got to build, and we got to create facilities for spaces for people to come and find Jesus in and worship Jesus. And it was an incredible privilege. And part of the ministry of that was an incredible school, and we got to minister into kids' lives. And because it was a private school, they got to do assembly, and literally assembly was a worship session. And we got to introduce guys to Jesus, and I got to build, and I got to play in the dirt with the kids, and I got to do all of those things. And then I came to Durban North, and it was a little bit different to the South Coast. And I came and I started to take out some walls. For those of you that have been around long enough, you know there used to be a whole lot of walls just on my left here and your right, but those walls no longer exist. And I loved it that one day... You know what I love? I love well-formed people in Christ when they get older and they can just be so gentle and humble. Because one of the things that Jackson and I did, which was very different to the age or that generation, was we stripped all the carpets and we stripped everything and we took it to its raw concrete, and then we exposed the globes with no shades, and a beautiful, delightful, humble, gentle older lady said, "Oh, I'm loving all the changes that you're making. What are you going to put onto the floor?" And we said, "No, this is it." And then she said, "Well, what shades are we going to put on the globes?" And we said, "No, that's it." She goes, "I love it. I love it." And it was so beautiful. And then you start to go on this reconciling journey, and the community starts to take a bit of shape, and then some people start to pass some comments, and then you kind of like, okay, maybe I need to retreat a little bit. Maybe I'm not as adventurous, or I shouldn't be as adventurous. And so in my late 30s, I start to have my adventure taken out of me. I start to have something of the unique design of God taken out of me. You're getting a personal story here. Beaten out of me. And then, so I start to become a little bit more tame. I start to become a little bit more safe. I start to become a little bit more sanitized. And then we have COVID and riots and floods, and just surviving is hard enough. And then so we have circumstances that start to beat us into smaller spaces. And so suddenly the adventure, we can't travel, we can't go and explore things, we can't build things because money's dried up. Just putting food on the table becomes an effort. And so circumstance started to beat out of me this unique design that God has. And it's taken me some years. I feel like for the last decade, what has happened is by both people and by circumstance, something of the unique design of God has been locked up and constricted in me. But over the last couple of months, or the last couple of years, there's just been this yearning inside of me to say, like, I'm not okay. I'm not okay. Like, I'm operating my business side. I trained in business, and my business side is okay, and I've got that, and I'm kind of preaching, and I'm doing the pastoral work. But there was a piece of me that I knew was missing and locked up. And I feel like the key, God didn't take away the key. Circumstances and people took away the key. Well, I locked it up because it became safe. Because we start to take some blows, we start to have some disappointments, we start to have some people leave the building, we start to have some comments passed, and when we kind of go like, hey, okay, well, people don't like that. But I found the key again. That's the moral of today's story. And so we start to be a little bit, it's going to get a little wild. I know the guy that styles my hair is part of this church, and he looked at me last week and he said, Richard, you have to come in. You have to come in because it's embarrassing for me that people know that I do your hair and it looks like that. And I said, tough, because I'm going to grow it long. And I'm going to get a thick, bushy beard. And I'm going to get my wildness back. And because sometimes what we have to do is do some practical things until our internal disposition changes. Then I can kind of shave my beard, and then I can get my hair back in order. But until then, I've got to do some practical things which remind me every day of who God's designed me to be. What about you? What about you? What key have you put away that you've lost? What key have you put away and you know where it is and you're desperate to unlock it, but you don't know that there is the security and the safety to be able to unlock it? I want to remind us of what Jesus wants from us as we are first and foremost His disciples. As His call to us is to follow Him, what does He mean by that? And so we're going to turn to John chapter 21, verses 18 to 22. And what's happened is there's this guy, Peter, who has actually just denied Jesus, right? So he has failed. We heard last week from Mark van Pletzen this beautiful message, Joshua chapter 9 and 10. Joshua fails, and the very next chapter he says, God, I need you, and the sun stands still, and Israel wins. I'm not going into that whole story today. You can go and listen to the message. But there's this thing of actually God, our failure, when we lock up a piece of who we are, or when we even turn against God in a particular way, that doesn't turn Him against us. And we're still able to come back to Him and say, God, okay, for 45 years, for 47 years, for the last 2 years, for the last 10 years, for the last 80 years, I locked away a piece of who You designed me to be. But while I still have breath, I can unlock that lock, and I'm able to live into the design that You've called me to. Peter has done this, and he's rebelled against God, but Jesus restores him. But there's a very pertinent statement that he passes at the end of this interaction. He says this, very truly I tell you, Peter, when you were younger, you dressed yourself and went where you wanted. We like that, eh? We like dressing ourselves in our own style, in our own way. We like going where we want. We like self-autonomy. But when you're old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will dress you, and they'll lead you where you do not want to go. And Jesus said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. And He said to him, follow me. What's not written there? Peter hears him, looks around the room. Peter turned and saw that the disciple whom Jesus loved was following them. And when Peter saw him, he said, well, Lord, what about him? Jesus answered, if I want him to remain alive until I return, what is that to you? You must follow me. That statement, what is that to you? What is that to you? from the Master, from the one who secures our future, from the one who gives us a firm foundation for all eternity, from the one who restores us into relationship with our Creator God. What is someone else's life to you? Don't let other people cause you to retreat or shrink back or lock away pieces of you that God has designed. Don't let circumstances cause you to go into a shell and be smaller. Jesus would say in this moment, what is that to you? What if his desire is that some of you would live until however many years until Jesus comes back? What is that to me? But you, Richard, follow me. You, Peter, follow me. You, Jackie, follow me. How much of our spiritual energy is spent looking at someone else's journey instead of just following Jesus on our own? 3 things. Number 1, we have to know our design. We have to know our design. Imagine we spent as much energy on knowing our own design as we do following other people on social media or TV or... Imagine we spent as much energy knowing our own design. Psalm 139, many of us who have been part of church would know this well. You are fearfully and wonderfully made. Those 2 words mean something. And so English has tried to translate them, but I'm going to put a lot of words to what the Bible just puts as one word because actually it wasn't written in English. So this word fearfully means this: to stand in awe, reverence, or profound respect. Here's a question that I felt God asked me, and I want to ask you today. Do you stand in profound respect of how God's designed you? Or do you disregard what God has put in you? Do you stand in awe of what God has put inside you? The word wonderfully means this. It means unique or distinct. And it points out that we are a custom masterpiece. So we are fearfully and wonderfully made. We are distinct. And therefore, if I keep following Gavin, if I keep trying to look like Gavin, which I've been guilty of with his shoe collection. No, that was unfair. With his worship. If I keep trying to look like Gavin, I am denying the unique custom masterpiece that God's put in me. My expression of worship to God has to look different to Gavin's. And I'm not talking about standing here and singing on a Sunday. I'm talking about the way we dedicate and devote our life and what we put our resources to and how we organize that and how we stand alongside one another, but me being fully me, unsafe, unsanitized, wild. And what does that look like? That God has chosen me to come and be the pastor of this community for our future, and it required somebody who was unsafe and unsanitized and wild enough to transform a suburban community into a reconciled community. It took something. And it cost something. But when did the cost in my story outweigh the worth of it? And so many of us, we've fallen into that trap. We've Psalm 139, we're fearfully and wonderfully made. We people, the cost of being us, somewhere in the equation, it's not worth it. Because the noise coming from circumstance, the noise coming from other people is very loud. And then we mistake that thing of, as far as it's up to you, live at peace with all men. And we kind of think like, okay, well, that means I'll become what you want me to be. That's not what living peace with all men means at all. And so we have to know our design. God creates originals, not copies. We heard this, we told you last Sunday that we had just been away at the AOG Group Leadership Conference. And one of the guys spoke, and he gave some statistics coming out of Gallup's research. Some of you may have done this in your business places, whatever, but there's a personality kind of profiling tool called the Strength Finder or Strengths Finder. And I've done it several times. We've done it with a team. We haven't done it with our new team, staff team, but we're going to pull that out and do that. But StrengthsFinder comes up with a strength profile, and it names your top 5 strengths. And here's what Gallup research says. Your top 5 strengths, 1 in 33 million people will have the same top 5 strengths. There's 34 of them, 33 of them. So there's 1 in the world that's going to have the same, all 33. But your top 5 is 1 in 33 million. That means this. South Africa, just over 60 million people. It means just on your top 5 strengths, there's only 1 other person in South Africa like you. Not the same as you, like you. And so when you try to become someone else, you are denying this community, you're denying God in the city of Durban, the unique fingerprint that He has put on you, the fearfully, in awe, wonderfully made you. We don't have that luxury or that privilege of trying to be someone else other than what God has fearfully and wonderfully made. We have to know our design, friends. We have to know our design. See, God focuses on our design. The example that the guy used at the conference was so good. Like Lionel Messi, all right, world's best footballer. That's not an argument. I'm not voting for him as the world's best footballer. But he's up there, right? He's left-footed, for those that don't know. It would have been absolutely crazy for this left-footed genius to come into a club and the coach says, right, put away the left foot, I'm going to teach you your right foot. And I'm going to spend 20 years honing your right foot. Lionel Messi would not be the number 1 or the top 5 football players in the world. No, they say you have a devastating left foot. We're going to focus on that left foot, and we're going to maximize that and amplify that and all of those good words. And and that's what we do. And so actually when we start to know our design, the Spirit of God, we start to become secure. When we're in Christ, we start to become secure in who we are. The 1 in 5 profile, 1 in 33 million of the top 5 profile, and we can actually go, that's okay. It's not arrogance. I'm still humble in the way that I present myself to the world, but I'm also confident in who Christ has made me. And actually I want to mature that thing. The gift is free. Maturity is expensive. And many people walk around saying, this is my gift, this is my gift, this is my gift, but there's zero influence following the gift. Why? Because we haven't paid the price to mature it. And so we have to know our design. And so he says, well, Jesus, bring it back to Peter. What is that to you? You have a design. You have a call. This is what you are going to do. You be obedient and follow me. The moment we spend our life trying to become somebody else, we begin losing that unique fingerprint that God has placed upon us. Jesus doesn't call us to be copies. He calls us to be disciples. And so just a question. Am I trying to become who God created me to be, or who I admire most? Or who I admire most? Second thing we need to do is we need to own our devotion. We need to own our devotion. Again, there's been so much ministry to us in the last few kind of 10 days, and I'm just trying to capture some of this stuff and bring it to us so that we can learn from it. Matthew chapter 25, 1 to 13 is the story where there's a wedding that's about to take place. There's a wedding party, and there's 10 virgins, and there's the bridegroom. And the story goes that the 10 virgins all have their lampstands, and they suddenly called, and they said, quickly, the bridegroom, we've heard that the bridegroom is coming. Get your lamps and come. But now the lamps in the olden days, they were oil-driven. They were oil-powered. And so if you took a lamp without oil, you're holding a piece of glass. You needed the lamp with oil. And some of you may know the story. And again, so there's 5 virgins that pick up oil, and there's 5 virgins that don't take oil. And then they end up waiting a long time for the bridegroom. I think it's the only time ever that the bridegroom holds up the bride. But they spend this long time waiting. And then the five virgins that hadn't taken oil, they run out of oil. And they say, quickly, can you lend us? And the five other virgins that have taken oil say, no, we don't know how long we're waiting for. We want to make sure that we've got oil. Go and buy some. And then the five disappear, and it's at that time that the bridegroom comes, and the five virgins that had oil go in to be with the bridegroom, and the other five get locked out. And we know that that's a story talking about when Jesus returns, will those of us that love him, will we be found to still be fulfilling his purposes? Will the fire of God still be aflame in us? Will there still be oil in us? And we know that he's talking about that. Jesus, our bridegroom, and we're the bride, and we've got to be ready to come. And we're waiting for him, and we're waiting for him, and we're waiting for him. But the story is this, that we have to own our own devotion. We cannot borrow somebody else's faith. We can't borrow somebody else's faith. And so if you're sitting in this room, and this is your only faith experience of a week, may I suggest that you need to start introducing some more faith experiences. You need to start introducing some more devotional practices, and we can help you with all of that. You just have to stick up your hand and ask. But there's this thing of like, no, we've got to take responsibility for our personal journey with Jesus. Because we don't want to be caught on that day like, oh, once upon a time I knew I was being prepared for a bridegroom, but when he came, I was kicking back my heels and I was out the room. What has been the risk, you know, like any movement of church over the centuries, there's beauty to it, but anything that gets, anything beautiful can be idolized. Anything beautiful. And so the challenge of the last kind of 20 years of church is that we've learned some things to really aid people in their worship experience. And it's moved with something it's moved with something of the culture of the day. That's not bad. That's not bad. But if we start to begin idolizing it, effectively what it can mean is this, that we just keep polishing the lamp, but we forget about the oil. And so we rock up to church on a Sunday, and we know that there's going to be some skilled musicians, and they're going to help us with our worship, and there's going to be a word from God, a word from a preacher who's hopefully done his homework or her homework and kind of like can present something that's inspiring, and then we walk out of here, and our lamp's been a little bit polished, but there's no oil. There's no intimacy with Jesus. There's no power of the Spirit of God. And so when we keep looking at someone else, when we keep looking at, okay, well, so Kerry can play the keyboard. I've always wanted to know how to play the piano. And it's like, I want to become Kerry. I want to be like Kerry. I want to do that. I want to do that. And it's like, God's like, no, but I've called you to this, Peter. I've called you to this, Richard. What is that to you? That's her intimate devotion. It's not my intimate devotion. And so stop polishing the lamp and stop trying to be something. Like, I can put on the shoes, I can put on the clothes, I can wear an oversized shirt and try and look like Johnny, and I can do these things. Hey, listen, it's been a long time since we've had a youth leader that we can just kind of tune in the front row, so it's nice to have you here. But it's part of your role, part of your development and maturity, and we love you a lot. We love you a lot. But we have to own our own devotion. See, we can borrow many things. You can't borrow intimacy. You cannot borrow devotion. You cannot borrow revelation. You cannot borrow obedience. You cannot borrow oil. See, borrowed faith only survives while somebody else is leading. Personal faith survives when nobody is watching. So while Jax and I are leading in this room, you get to live in the faith that we have. We would hope to live in your faith as well, and we do. So but you can work with what I'm saying here. When we're in this room, you're not having to carry the faith necessarily of what this meeting looks like. That's the pastor's job. But when you walk out of this room, what does that mean for you? If you are only accustomed to living off of the faith of Jax and me, or the faith of the elders, or the faith of the pastors, if you're only accustomed to living off of our faith, it means that when you're on your own, you're not going to be able to be standing secure. Your foundation becomes a little flaky. We start to worry. See, it's the lamp that attracts attention, but it's oil that produces light. And the lamp is designed to bring light, not to look pretty. Number 3, we have to steward our fire. Leviticus chapter 6. Mark van Pletsen spoke around this. One of our apostolic partners spoke around this to the staff and elders on Sunday night. I'll take it a little bit further for me, but Leviticus chapter 6, he talks about the priest's responsibility, and God's giving the instructions of what's to happen, and he says this to the priests. He says, you are to make sure that the fire keeps burning. The fire on the altar keeps burning. And so effectively what's happened is a sacrifice has been brought, and God's brought the fire down to consume it. So God brings the fire, the initial fire, but then it's the responsibility of the priest to keep that fire. And there are 2 things that are to happen. One is you got to keep every morning, wipe away the ash of yesterday's wood, and 2, put on the new wood. Those 2 things have meaning, friends. What happens is as the longer we walk with Jesus, the longer we go, the longer we have put ourselves on the altar day after day, year after year, decade after decade, is the ash heap builds up. But what ash does is when we put on a new log on the fire, the ash blocks the airflow to keep that fire burning. And so God gives a very clear instruction. Yesterday's sacrifice was yesterday's sacrifice. Wash it away. We don't get to say, but God, I did this for you yesterday. We just get to go, God, your mercy is on you every day, and my responsibility is to lay my life down as a sacrifice before you, and today I put my life on the altar. Today I put wood on the fire. Today I do this. Yesterday's service is gone. Yesterday's sacrifice is gone. It's been consumed. Today, what does that look like? We have to steward our fire, friends. Churches don't drift toward revival, they drift toward decline. See, the default direction of every fire is to extinction. The default outcome of every fire is extinction. Why? Because it can only live when there is something to be consumed. And so when we stop putting ourselves on the altar, when we stop following Jesus, when we start saying, oh, but what about, it means that we're not putting ourselves on the altar, and therefore the fire has already started to extinguish. And so we wonder why we're in Durban, we've got xenophobic attacks. What is the church doing about it? What are Christians doing about it? What are we doing about it? Why is the atmosphere of Durban not shifting because the church is in it? What is taking place? Well, is the church so busy comparing? Well, is Anthem like Thrive Church? Or is Anthem like Rivers Church? Or is Anthem like Grace Church? Or is Anthem like The Rock? Or is Anthem like Harvest? I don't preach like Mark Nyman. I don't preach like Rich Olivier. I don't preach like Byron, because I have my own fingerprint and my own unique, fearfully and wonderfully set apart kind of creative being. I'm that guy, and God has called me at this point in time to lead Anthem, and so I've got to go, all right, guys, as we gather together as the community, I'm not over you, but I am the pastor amongst us, and we've got to go, this is what it looks like. And we have to keep putting wood on the fire, and we have to keep putting ourselves on the altar. Yesterday is gone. Mark said something very profound to me. We went out on Monday, and the voice of an apostolic partner, the gift of an apostolic partner is he's able to speak and say some things that most people wouldn't be able to perceive and say. And he said, okay, Rich, I know you've just done a building project. And I know you've painted the walls. They're all fresh paints. But he says, if I ask you this question, he said this, I see Anthem, and I see that it's primed for something. But actually, when I came 3 years ago, it was also primed for something. He says, what's happened in your leadership that something hasn't happened? And I know he loves me. So it was sore and inspiring. And he says, Richard, you've been leading 13 years. Yesterday's service is gone. Wipe the ashes. If you were to come in today as the new pastor of Anthem, what would you do? What would you do? And if that means you have to repaint the wall that you painted yesterday, a particular color, repaint the wall. Because today is a fresh log on the fire. Today is a new sacrifice, that the fire of God can continue to burn, that the oil can continue to bring light. Church, I want to inspire us. I want to pull us that actually we've been in Durban North for 125 years. There's a lot of ash, a lot of good ash, a lot of good sacrifice. Many of you have given hundreds of thousands, if not millions of rands over tithes over the years, over offerings to building projects, over offerings to ministry. Many of you are sitting here, and I'd want to say this with absolute reverence and humility. Yesterday is yesterday, it is gone, and God's request of us is, can you wipe off the ash? We don't get to say, I've done my bit, it's now a new person's turn. And we've been guilty of saying that. God calls us today, while we have breath in our lungs, to lay ourselves down, and through the unique fingerprint of God in our lives, that we would mature that, we would own our devotion on that, we would know our design, we would own our devotion on that, and that we would steward the fire of God. We're never called to admire yesterday's fire. We're only called to steward today's. Question: what fire has God entrusted to you, to me, that requires fresh attention? Jesus speaks to Peter, and Peter answers. Peter's answer is about someone else. What about John? And Jesus says, no, I'm talking to you, Peter. What is your response? This is what I'm asking you to do. Stop looking sideways, friends. Let's return to what God has placed in our hands. Let's know our design. Let's own our devotion. Let's steward our fire, and let's follow Him.
Thank you for watching today's message. If you'd like to take your next step with us, get connected, or find out more about Anthem, visit our website or reach out through the Church Center app. We'd love to walk the journey with you.